Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. And to all the mothers out there, happy Mother's Day. Um, and to all the feminine energy workers, also happy Mother's Day. Happy acknowledgement of your feminine energy, of your feminine self. Today, I'm going to be reading the meditations It's a little bit the normal length of past meditations, and it gave me some tremendous insight about something that I had no idea that it would. But I'm going to first pull a card here and I'm gonna see what card comes up for today. I'm using the Oracle of Mystical Moments, and these are I call them the dream cards because they look like dreams. I mean, they have like a very dreamlike essence to them, and I just think they're really beautiful cards, and I just love the artwork of them. So I'm going to give these a good mix up, and I'm going to see. See what. Okay. No, kind of. Okay, one more. Okay, there we go. And the card that I got today is Stranded, which is really kind of interesting because the dream is called The Cruise, and it is about going on a trip. And the notion of being stranded somewhere is kind of an undercurrent of traveling. People wonder if when they go somewhere, if they're going to be stranded somewhere, if they're going to end up somewhere where they don't want to be, or if they're going to forget something or, whatever. So this notion of being stranded and then this ship right above it is really above the person is really kind of interesting in the imagery of the dream. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back aside, and I'm going to go ahead and start reading the dream. Today is day number 8. It's May 11th, 2025, and the dream is called The Cruise. I said, with today being Mother's Day, I'm seeing that the dreams that I had about the trip I took with my mother-in-law. The trip was in 2023, and it was the most lovely time. The fact that I had a dream about it with both my mother-in-law, her friends, and my husband, who had not been with us on the trip in 2023, is kind of unusual. At any rate, I will tell you how it went in the dream. And Metatron says, we will discuss the dream first, then what happened in 2023 that paralleled it, and more specifically, why it paralleled. I said, okay, so at the start, Mama and I were alone and getting ready, going on a cruise together. It was perhaps a flashback to the Denali trip that we had taken in 2023. The dream was on February 1st, 2024, so the reference to last year was in fact 2023. The thing I recall was just prior to the trip, we were at Mama's trying to pack for it. I was throwing a bunch of clothes into a suitcase, but somehow forgot to pack makeup, jewelry, and facial products. I also thought I had forgotten my phone, which I later realized was in my purse. Nigel says, you often dream like that you forget important things, yet sometimes you wake up recalling that the dream was not so much about the actual trip, but about the preparations and the fact that you had forgotten something. I said, true, that happens a lot. I dream that I forgot a lot or lost things. They never actually come to pass, but in the dreams, I tend to have moments where I freak out because I realize that something significant was lost or forgotten. Why is that? Metatron says, you are conscious of the things that you want to bring along or use. You merely think that this is a way for you to recall the items that you will need. When you wake up in the morning, what do you generally do as you are getting ready for an actual trip? I said, well, I tend to check and make certain that the items in question are either in my purse or in the suitcase. And Metatron says, exactly. It is a means of reminding yourself of the significant items that you may need in regards to the trip. So do continue. You recall more than just that. I said, yes. As we arrive and are getting ready to board, we meet up with Mama's friends. The lady with us has a camera that she's showing me how to use. This was done after I had assumed that my phone had been forgotten. Metatron says, meaning a compromise, making what may have been wrong as being right made right. You wanted to make certain that there was pretty good opportunities to take photos to make memories of the experience. I said, yeah, but it was fun to learn this, and I realized it was fun to learn this. As we were getting on board, I saw something that looked like an old Viking ship. It was large and vast, but it seemed as though we were the only people who could actually see it. The people around us were carrying on with their discussions and what have you. Once we were able to take some pictures of it, the ship was gone. And I have to make a note about the ship before I continue, because this ship, actually, this Viking ship thing that we saw in the dream, was actually in reference back to a trip that I took to Sweden back in 1996, where I went to a museum with a friend of mine and we saw Viking ships and stuff like that. And I think that was where the reference came from. I didn't mention it in the dream or in the discussions with Metatron, but I did realize it as I was reading this, that this could be exactly what it was, that I was remembering that snippet of a trip that I had taken back in 1996. Okay. So with that said, I'll go ahead and continue because it's very significant here. Metatron says the past meets the present. The act of going on this trip was not just an issue of venturing into a different sort of reality. Everything that was going on with you was not confined to 2024 or 2023, but instead you were seeing a sort of history play out. You were not just witnessing the present day reality, but you were also seeing a kaleidoscope of events and times and instances that tells you that time is not a constant thing, but rather a living concept of changes and occurrences that are far beyond the mere concepts of just one event, one time, or one experience playing out. I said that explains why my husband became an active part of the dream. At one point, I was seeing him present, but was also finding my phone. In another instance, I was on the ship, then off, and then when I tried to get back on board, there was a second ship docked, and I didn't know which one was mine. Later, I was in the cabin with my husband and Mama, and someone knocked at the door wanting to interview me. Metatron says, indeed, it is time giving a sort of inference as to what was going on. This becomes a sort of concept of the entire dream, the notion of time and how time has an impact and plays out in your dreams. It is not obvious, but instead very subtle. The movements of the ship, the people involved in the actual events, the confusion of the ship, which one you are on. The whole sense of familiarity is simply not there. You are fluctuating with those varying events. This is pretty much established as the various events play out. Is this a journey you took in 2023, or is it something far removed from it? Sure, there are aspects of the journey you took that is, there are snippets of that trip in the dream, but it is in this instance where you are in a brand new and different instance where all the things are just small bits from various experiences that are playing into the overall concept. So essentially what this dream is really about are several experiences that came together in one dream, and suddenly they are fitting together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And then he says, tell me more. I said, okay. At the far end of the cabin, there was a sliding door that led out to a balcony. It was connected with the other cabins with a single chair as well as a table by the door. It was similar to the way the terrace was set up in the rehab clinic that I was at after my cancer treatments. Metatron says, there you go. The entire dream were basically snippets of past experiences that you You were not in a simple ship on a wide river. You were in many places that are fused together by you, a single person with an array of experiences. This is not a cruise, but it is more or less a flashback to various experiences that were, for all intents and purposes, important times in your life. Give me the last bits of the dream, then we can discuss these various ideas that you had. I said, okay, we were at the end of a row of cabins, and there was a wall to the left side of the balcony. To the right, we could see tables and chairs like ours. Next door was a mama's friend's room, and mama, my husband, and I shared a cabin. And Metatron says, okay, let's break things down. Do you remember a time when your husband, your mother-in-law, and you took a trip? I said, yes, in 2022, when we went to a vacation together to the south of Spain. And Metatron says, okay, how did that look? I said, well, we were in a hotel, and each of the rooms had a balcony. We had our own from our own room at one end of a row of rooms, and Mama was right next door to us. And Metatron says, so that explains the balcony that you described in the dream. The room you had was where you often congregated, correct? I said, yes, we would pull a third chair to the balcony, and we would often sit together and talk. And Metatron says, okay, so the image is part of the dream, and it's a good memory with her. What can you tell me about the trips with your husband? I said, well, we would often go to Spain or to Spanish Island on holiday. We did that after I finished treatment for cancer, but this was never really a question. Metatron says, you were once interviewed for Polish television when you and your husband traveled to Poland. How did you feel about that? I said it was a mixed bag of feelings, to be honest. I didn't feel like I felt fit in. I felt like an outsider. So would that interview somehow be a part of the dream? So why would that interview be a part of a dream? Metatron says it could be. What were you feeling when they were interviewing you? I said, I don't know. I wanted to stay positive, but I did actually sort of start the hobby during the time when I was in chemo, so that seemed relevant. But afterwards, when everything fell apart, I got the impression that my cancer story was a means for someone to basically tell me I didn't belong. It wasn't a pity party, but it felt like I was the outsider who didn't belong, and someone was looking for a reason to tell me I don't belong. In essence, they didn't need a reason to tell me I didn't belong. I kind of felt it. It's like my guides were telling me to not try because it would be like forcing square pegs into round holes. After that trip, I had a week before leaving for the Dachau trip, which was a polar opposite of the Poland trip. The only downside was that my husband was not a part of the Dachau trip, and I always felt badly that the trip was such a letdown simply because he and I were together and it should have been nice. Metatron says, so in your dream, you tried to make a not-so-nice trip seem nice by incorporating positive things together to create a sort of joy-filled state where things were nice and harmonious. I said, it makes sense. I mean, we've been on some nice trips, but sometimes things just happen that soured it. It wasn't him or that were causing the trip to go south. Well, was that the message of the dream, that sometimes things don't work as expected, but that we should make the best of them and still try to enjoy our time together? Metatron says, yes, that is the message of it, but there is a deeper idea that you might want to consider. If you don't feel a part of a group setting, remember the time you spend in the library where it is you and another person. There's nothing inherently wrong with not being a people person. Also, you are in a group that did not speak your language. You were basically cast off for that reason. Everyone there were speaking a language you could not. There was no way of knowing what was being said, who they may have been talking about. There was no effort made in including you in that conversation. So when you suspected that someone may have said that you were displeased, that was something you did not know. I said, is this relevant? And Metatron said, it is only relevant in the fact that you trust your instincts and you can tell and read people's energies. And that told you that something was not right. So the dream is not about accusing others of doing something you felt was hurtful, but it was about trusting your instincts, about looking beyond language barriers and seeing the truth. The energy told you far more about that situation than anyone could have realized. You could understand what was happening. Your trust in people was damaged by those who put words to you that did not exist, but your inability to speak a language made things all the more difficult. What is your takeaway? I said, well, aside from the obvious of never wanting to go on a trip with this group again, I'm going to listen to my instincts with regard to group settings. I think you or my guides are telling me or warning me about this trip before it happened, and I guess I should have listened. Metatron says that is the essence of things. Often there are things that can be avoided by not jumping into a setting that could be unsettling. And in this instance, you had leapt into a situation that was very, very unsettling for you. I said, the interview on Friday, should I do it? Metatron says, do you want to do it? I said, I don't know. I have reservations about it. I'm not sure I am what they're looking for. They seem to be looking for entrepreneurs, but I am not an entrepreneur. I am merely someone who is sharing a story, one meditation at a time. Metatron says, then tell this to them and ask them if they want to speak to you on your terms. If they do, then do the interview. But if it still seems beyond your expectations, be aware that declining is not a bad idea. I said, okay, I still have a few days to think about it. Metatron says, you will make the right choice. Don't worry. I said, I'll try not to. Thank you so much. So that's where we ended. And I have to say, looking at this card, stranded. That is the overall impression that I have, or the concern that I have, is of being stranded, of being stuck in a situation that I don't want to be in, and of trying to decide if I really want to put myself out there in that situation, or if I want to say, okay, I'm going to decline, or I'm going to do things on my own terms. And if I'm able to do them on my own terms, then I will go forward and do them. But if I have reservations about doing it, then maybe it's not the right thing for me to do. And so the stream seems very, very attuned to that idea that making decisions or going on trips or doing certain things may have impact on my own well-being and on what I am going to do. And as far as the group was concerned that went to Poland, I know that this was not the group for me. And I know that making the decision to not do it and deciding that this is not for me, it's not a bad thing to do. It's just a human thing to do. So with that said, thank you for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day. Today's sunny, bright, and beautiful here in Germany, so I'm going to get out and enjoy it. So have a good day. Take care. And as always, namaste.